Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me is Greg Portell, Partner and Head of Global Consumer Industries and Retail Practice at Kearney, to discuss how the consumer will approach fall and holiday shopping and if there is a playbook for how retailers should plan for and react. Greg, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thanks. Happy to be here. It'll be an interesting fall and winter for retailers, that's for sure.
That is certainly for sure. So let's start with where we are now. How has COVID-19 impacted the supply chain and associated costs being passed down to the consumer?
Well, I think what we saw early in the pandemic was all of the strain that the shift of demand was putting on retailers. They learned from that, which is why when you see going into the fall, a really lengthening of the holiday shopping season in order to take some of that strain off of the retail supply chains, because as they start to put more product through there, it becomes more expensive for them. And that's what they're really trying to avoid passing on to the consumer at this point.
With the e-commerce shift accelerating, how do you see companies changing their strategies to gain customers?
Well, I think what really impacted retail at the beginning of the pandemic was when there was only one way to access the consumer, whether that was in a mall or in a physical location, it didn't really matter. It was really this concept of being locked into a single point of contact. So what we're finding with the transition to e-commerce is that retailers really want to have as many touch points with consumers as they can, so that if one comes under pressure, they can shift that demand to another touch point.
Now, this is really interesting because when we think about the initial purchase, we don't think about the effect that returns and costs associated with processing customer returns comes into play. How do you think that's going to be impacted as a result of more online shopping?
Well, and it's not just online shopping that it's affecting the return. It's also the time of that demand. So as we lengthen out the holiday season, we're going to have products that are purchased in October, then again, not returned until December or January. That backflow of logistics associated with those returns is really complicating the earnings profile for these retailers. It's really complicated to get that flow back to the retail warehouse in an effective and cost-effective way.
And that's really interesting that you bring that up, because even though the holiday season is longer this year, just like we saw in the beginning of the pandemic, shipping took so much longer because you had to figure and factor in the impact to shipping and transportation. So if you have, the influx of holiday shopping, then you have also the influx of all these returns that need to be processed. I would imagine that's going to change or alter some of consumer shopping habits as well this season.
Yeah, the challenge that retailers are putting themselves in is they're creating this demand in some cases artificially, because we're seeing not only the lengthening of the holiday season, but also the amount of discounts that retailers are putting, offering to consumers. So ultimately the consumers are going to buy more, but that typically outpaces their real demand. So a lot of that volume is going to come flowing back to the retailers in the December or January timeframe. And it really is expensive because the supply chains aren't built to have that backflow.
And as we look to the other side of COVID-19 and perhaps even holiday 2021, do you think as a result of the pandemic that consumer behavior has shifted forever and it's going to be more e-commerce, or we could revert back to see more of a blend?
Well, what we're hearing retailers talk about is really this concept of channel agnostic. Consumers don't define their shopping by channel. They define it by, I want this product at this price from this retailer at this timing. Sometimes that's in store, sometimes that's a blend of in-store and online. So I think what consumers have really gotten accustomed to during the pandemic is the ability to shop regardless of channel. So what retailers are having to do is redefine how they engage that consumer. So it's not a channel-based conversation. It's not e-commerce or physical. It is a retail store that happens to be digital or in a mall or physical location. So it's a bit different way to think about the consumers moving forward.
Greg, I'm glad you brought that up, because I always often wondered why retailers would silo where their revenue streams are coming from. Doesn't it all go to the same P&L at the end of the day, or are they just trying to decipher where resources should be allocated for building the best channel? Isn't it all the same income stream?
Well, this is where we're seeing a transition in the way retailers deal with it. In the old days, 5-10 years ago, e-commerce was an incubated part of the business, and it basically supported its own P&L. Now the more sophisticated retailers have blended that together so that it is a single P&L, because you think about the challenges of having to do like a buy online, pick up in store. That's an e-commerce purchase that actually has the cost base of a store sale. So we're seeing the more sophisticated retailers view it as a single P&L and actually a single lifetime value for that particular consumer, regardless of the channel.
All right, Greg, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.